David never thought his Tuesday would end like this. One moment he was checking navigation charts in his Space Explorer ship, and the next moment, alarms were screaming at him from every direction. Red lights flashed across the control panel like angry fireflies. Come on, David whispered to his ship as he pulled hard on the steering controls. The engine was making terrible grinding sounds, like metal trying to eat metal. Something had gone very wrong during his routine mission. To map new planets, his ship, the Starwalker, had been his home for 3 months now. It wasn't the biggest or newest ship in the Earth's space fleet, but it was reliable at least. It used to be reliable. Now it was falling through space like a rock dropped from a tall building. David tried everything he could think of. He pressed buttons, flipped switches, and even kicked the control panel once out of frustration. Nothing worked. The planet below him was getting bigger and bigger through his front window. It looked blue and green, almost like Earth, but he could see strange purple clouds swirling around it. "This is Explorer Ship Starwalker calling anyone who can hear me." David spoke into his radio. "I'm going down on an unknown planet. If someone gets this message, my location is..." He looked at his navigation screen, but it was flickering and showing numbers that made no sense. The ship started shaking so hard that David's teeth rattled. He could feel the heat building up as they hit the planet's atmosphere. This was it. After all his training, all his dreams of exploring space, it might end here on some planet that didn't even have a name. David strapped himself into his pilot's seat as tight as he could. The safety harness dug into his shoulders, but that was the least of his problems right now. Right. Through the window, he could see they were heading toward what looked like a forest. At least it wasn't a mountain or an ocean. The trees were getting closer. David could see they were unlike any trees from Earth. They seemed to glow with a soft silver light, and their leaves moved even though there didn't seem to be any wind. "Here we go," David said to himself, and then everything went black. When David woke up, the first thing he noticed was that he wasn't dead. That seemed like a good start. The second thing he noticed was that everything hurt. His head felt like someone had used it as a drum, and his ribs ached with each breath he took. He was lying on something soft. But it wasn't the hard pilot seat from his ship. David tried to open his eyes, but the light was too bright. He could hear sounds around him, but they weren't the normal sounds of his ship's engines or computers beeping. Instead, he heard something that sounded almost like singing, but not quite. It was like music, but the notes seemed to float in the air longer than they should. There were also other sounds he couldn't identify, little chimes and soft whooshing noises. "Hello," David tried to say, but his voice came out as a rough whisper. His throat felt like he had been eating sand. The singing stopped immediately. David heard footsteps, but they were different from human footsteps. It seemed lighter, almost like someone dancing instead of walking. David forced his eyes open. Slowly. The first thing he saw was a ceiling made of what looked like woven branches and leaves. But they glowed with that same silver light he had seen on the trees during his crash. It was beautiful, like being inside a living lantern. Then he saw her. The being standing next to him was definitely not human. But she was beautiful in a way that made David forget about his pain for a moment. She was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to shimmer like water in moonlight. Her skin was a soft blue color, like the sky just before sunrise. Her eyes were large and kind, and they seemed to hold tiny stars inside them. She spoke to him. In that musical language he had heard before, her voice was gentle and concerned, even though David couldn't understand the words. She reached toward him with her hand, and David could see that her fingers were longer than human fingers, with what looked like tiny patterns of light dancing under her skin. David tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his side made him gasp and lie back down. The alien woman in David was pretty sure she was female, though he couldn't say exactly how he knew, made worried sounds, and gently pushed him back onto what he now realized was some sort of bed made from soft, silvery material. She left for a moment and came back with a small bowl containing liquid that glowed softly. She showed it to David and made drinking motions with her hands. David was incredibly thirsty, so he nodded. The liquid tasted like nothing he had ever experienced. It was sweet, but also had a freshness to it, like drinking a spring breeze. As soon as he swallowed it, the pain in his body began to fade, and his head cleared. "Thank you," David said, and the alien woman tilted her head like she was trying to understand. David pointed to himself. "David," he said clearly. The woman's eyes lit up with understanding. She pointed to herself and said something that sounded like Zara, but with musical notes mixed in. "Zara," David repeated, and she smiled. Her smile was warm and genuine, and it made her whole face glow a little brighter. Over the next few hours, David learned that Zara had found him in the wreckage of his ship and had somehow managed to get him to safety. She had treated his injuries. With medicines that seemed to be made from the glowing plants around them, David tried to communicate with hand, gestures, and simple words. He learned that Zara lived in a community not far from where his ship had crashed. He also learned that there were others like her, and they were all female. Every alien he saw over the next few days was female, which struck David as very unusual. Zara seemed to understand that David was not from their world. She would often look up at the stars and then at him, as if putting together the pieces of how he had arrived there. What worried David was how the other aliens looked at him. Whenever Zara brought him outside his shelter to get fresh air, he would see others watching him from a distance. They didn't seem afraid of him. But there was something in their expressions that made David feel like he was missing something important. The aliens all had the same glowing skin as Zara, but their light patterns seemed more intense lately. David noticed that they seemed restless, moving around more than usual, and their musical language had taken on different tones, more urgent, more emotional. Zara tried to explain something to him one evening as they sat outside his shelter. She drew pictures in the soft ground with a stick, showing what looked like a calendar with symbols. She pointed to one symbol that appeared to be glowing brighter than the others, then pointed to all the females in the distance, and then made gestures that David didn't understand but seemed important. David realized he had landed in the middle of something significant in their culture. Whatever was happening to these aliens, it was happening now. And his arrival had complicated things in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. As he watched Zara trying so hard to communicate with him, David felt a strange mix of gratitude and worry. He was alive because of her kindness, but he was also completely dependent on her in a world he didn't understand. The stars above this alien world were different from Earth's stars, reminding David just how far from home he was. His ship was damaged beyond his ability to repair. His radio was broken, and he had no way to contact Earth. But as he looked at Zara's patient, kind face in the silver light of the alien plants, David realized that being stranded might not be the worst thing that had ever happened to him. There were worse places to be lost than in the care of someone who had already saved his life once. He just hoped he could figure out what was happening around him before he accidentally caused problems. For the people who had shown him such kindness, 3 weeks had passed since David's crash, and his body was finally starting to feel normal again. The strange glowing medicine that Zara gave him worked better than anything he had ever seen on Earth. His broken ribs had healed completely, and even the deep cut on his forehead had disappeared without leaving a scar. But the more David learned about this world, the more confused he became. Every morning, Zara would sit with him and teach him words in her language. She was incredibly patient, repeating sounds over and over until David could make the musical tones that her people used to communicate. Looked at it was like learning to sing and speak at the same time. "Water," David would say in English, and Zara would respond with a sound like wind chimes mixed with flowing water. When David tried to copy it, Zara would smile and gently correct his pronunciation until he got it right. Through these daily lessons, David began to understand that Zara's people called themselves the Villani, or their world was named Lumina, which seemed fitting since everything here glowed with its own soft light. What amazed David most was how the Villani lived. Their homes weren't built the way humans built things. Instead, they seemed to grow their buildings from the living trees and plants around them. Zara showed him how they would touch certain plants and somehow convince them to grow into the shapes they needed. Walls, roofs, even furniture. "How do you do that?" David asked one day, as he watched Zara shape a vine into a comfortable chair. "Just by touching it and humming softly," Zara tried to explain, but the concept was difficult to translate. From what David could understand, the Villani had some kind of connection with all living things on their planet. They didn't take from nature, they cooperated with it. The Villani city that Zara brought him to visit was unlike anything David had ever imagined. Instead of concrete and steel, there were towers that spiraled up like enormous flowers, with bridges made of thick vines connecting them. Streams of clean water flowed through channels in the living floors, and the air smelled like spring rain and blooming flowers. But what struck David most was that he hadn't seen a single male Villani anywhere. Zara, David said one day as they walked through the city center, "Where are the men, the males of your species?" Zara's expression became sad, and she explained something that David's growing understanding of their language helped him grasp. The Villani males had died out generations ago due to a plague that only affected them. The females had survived, but they faced a serious problem. Their population was slowly declining, because they could only reproduce with males of their own species. This explained so much about how the Villani had reacted to David's arrival. He wasn't just a strange visitor from space, he was the first male they had seen in decades. "But I'm not Villani," David said, concerned about where this might be leading. "I'm human. We're completely different species." Zara nodded, understanding his worry. She explained that the Villani elders were trying to figure out the same thing. Some believed that David's arrival was a sign from their gods. Others worried that his presence might disrupt their carefully balanced society. David learned that the Villani had a council of elders led by a wise woman named Liana, who was older than anyone David had ever met, but still moved with grace and dignity. Elder Liana had been studying David from a distance, trying to decide what should be done about him. The more time David spent with the Villani, the more he understood about their current situation. Every 7 of their days, which were slightly longer than Earth days, the Villani females went through what they called the joining time. During these periods, they experienced intense emotions and a deep need for companionship and connection. Zara tried to explain this to David, but she seemed embarrassed talking about it. From what he could understand, it was a natural part of their biology, like how some Earth animals had mating seasons. But for the Villani, it was more complex. It involved emotional bonding, not just physical attraction. "Right now is joining time," David asked one day, when he noticed that all the Villani around him seemed more emotional than usual. Their skin patterns glowed brighter, and their musical language had become more intense and urgent. Zara nodded, her own skin flickering with patterns David was beginning to recognize as embarrassment, mixed with something else he couldn't identify. This explained why David felt like he was being watched all the time. Wherever he went in the city, he could feel eyes on him. Groups of Villani females would stop their conversations when he walked by, and he often caught them staring at him with expressions of curiosity and longing. It made David uncomfortable, but not because he felt threatened. The Villani were gentle people who seemed incapable of violence. What worried him was that he didn't understand what they expected from him, and he was afraid of accidentally doing something that might hurt them or their society. One day, while David was trying to repair his communication device with tools the Villani had made for him, a group of younger Villani females approached him. They were clearly nervous, giggling and whispering to each other in their musical language. One of them, who seemed braver than the others, stepped forward and said something to David in careful, practiced words. David realized she was trying to speak in English, something Zara must have taught them. "You ... Stay with us?" the young Villani asked, her large eyes hopeful. Before David could answer, Zara appeared and spoke quickly to the group in their own language. They looked disappointed but nodded respectfully and left. Out. "What did they want?" David asked. Zara's skin patterns showed embarrassment again. "They wanted to know if you would choose one of them as a companion during joining time, they think. They hope ... that maybe you could help our people continue." David felt his heart skip a beat. The weight of what the Villani were dealing with suddenly hit him fully. These people were facing extinction, and they saw him as a possible solution. But he was just one human, completely out of his element, trying to survive on an alien world. "Zara," David said carefully, "I care about you and your people. You've saved my life, and I've seen how kind and good the Villani are. But I don't know if I can be what you need me to be. Zara nodded sadly. I understand. It is not fair to ask this of you. You did not choose to come here. But even as she said this, David could see the hope in her eyes. Over the weeks they had spent together, he had grown to care deeply about Zara. She was intelligent, kind, and had a sense of humor that transcended species differences. When she laughed at his attempts to pronounce Villani words, or when she showed him something beautiful in their city, David felt a warmth in his chest that he had never experienced before. The problem was that David didn't know if his growing feelings for Zara were real, or if they were just the result of being dependent on her in this strange world. And he didn't know if Zara's apparent affection for him was genuine, or just influenced by her biology during this joining time. As David looked at his broken communication device, he realized he faced an impossible choice. If he could fix it and contact Earth, he could go home to his old life. But that would mean leaving behind these people who needed help, and leaving behind Zara, who had become more important to him than he wanted to admit. Elder Liana had been patient so far, but David knew that the Villani Council would eventually need an answer from him. They had invested time and resources in helping him recover. They deserved to know what he planned to do. The weight of an entire civilization seemed to rest on David's shoulders. He wasn't sure he was strong enough to carry it. David thought he was starting to understand the Villani culture. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. It happened during what Zara called the Festival of Lights, a ceremony that occurred every month when both of Lumina's moons were full. David had been living with the Villani for almost 2 months now, and he felt confident enough to attend public gatherings without causing too much disruption. The festival took place in the center of the city, in a beautiful circular garden, where the most ancient trees grew. These trees were enormous, their trunks wide enough that 20 people holding hands couldn't reach around them. Their branches formed a natural cathedral overhead, and their leaves glowed so brightly during the festival that no other light was. Nita Zara had spent hours explaining to David what would happen during the ceremony. The Villani would share stories, sing their traditional songs, and perform dances that had been passed down for thousands of years. It was meant to be a celebration of their connection to each other and to their world. Just stay close to me and follow my lead, Zara had told him that morning. The ceremony is very important to our people, but as long as you're respectful, everything will be fine. David felt honored to be included. In all his time on Lumina, he had only observed Villani ceremonies from a distance. This would be his first time actually participating in one of their sacred traditions. The ceremony began beautifully. Hundreds of Villani gathered in the garden, their skin patterns creating waves of light that rippled through the crowd like living art. The singing was unlike anything David had ever heard, harmonies that seemed to make the air itself vibrate with emotion. Elder Liana stood at the center of the gathering, her ancient voice still strong and clear as she told stories of the early days of Villani civilization. David couldn't understand every word, but the rhythm and emotion of her storytelling captivated him. Then came the dancing. The Villani moved in complex patterns around the ancient trees, their movements graceful and coordinated like a flock of birds in flight. David watched, mesmerized, as Zara joined the dance. She moved with such beauty and skill that he couldn't take his eyes off her. That's when he made his mistake. Without thinking, David stepped forward to get a better view of the dancing. He didn't realize that he had moved into a sacred space, an area where only certain Villani were allowed to stand during the ceremony. The moment David's foot crossed an invisible line marked by specific flowers planted in the ground, the singing stopped. The dancing stopped. Even the glowing of the trees seemed to dim every single. Villani in the garden turned to look at David. The silence was deafening. David could feel hundreds of eyes on him. Expressions on the Villani faces ranged from shock to confusion to something. That might have been anger. He had never seen anger on a Villani face before, and it frightened him more than he expected. "I'm sorry," David said quickly, stepping backward. "I didn't know. I'm sorry." But the damage was done. Several of the older Villani were making distressed sounds, their skin patterns flashing with colors David had learned meant deep upset. Some of the younger ones began to cry, not the sad crying of humans, but a musical wailing that made David's heart ache. Zara rushed to David's side, her own skin flickering with embarrassment and worry. She spoke quickly to Elder Liana, trying to explain that David hadn't meant any harm. Elder Liana raised her hand for silence, and the garden became quiet again. She looked at David for a long moment, her ancient eyes unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. Zara translated for David in a whisper. She says the ceremony must end early because the sacred space has been disrupted by someone who doesn't understand our ways, she says. She says this proves that some things cannot be shared between different peoples. David felt sick to his stomach. These people had saved his life, cared for him, and welcomed him into their community. And he had repaid their kindness. By ruining one of their most important celebrations, the Villani began to leave the garden quietly. But David could hear them talking in small groups. Even without understanding all their words, he could tell they were discussing him and what had happened. Zara, I'm so sorry, David said, as they walked back toward her dwelling. I didn't know there were boundaries I couldn't cross. I thought I was just getting a better view. Zara's skin patterns showed that she was trying to comfort him, but David could see the worry in her large eyes. I know you didn't mean to cause harm, David, but some of our people are saying that this proves you can never truly understand our ways. They think your presence here is causing problems that will only get worse. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay on the soft bedding that Zara had made for him from glowing plant fibers, staring up at the living ceiling of her home. The gentle light that usually comforted him now seemed to remind him of how different he was from everything around him. The next morning, 3 members of the Villani Council came to visit. David recognized them as important figures in the community, but he had never spoken to them directly before. Elder Liana spoke first, with Zara translating. The council has been discussing your situation, David. What happened yesterday has forced us to make a decision that we have been putting off for too long. David's heart began to beat faster. He had a feeling he wasn't going to like what came next. You have 3 options to offer you, Elder Liana continued. First, you can undergo a ritual that would help you understand our ways more deeply. Would change you, make you more like us in some ways, so that you could participate in our society without causing disruption. David looked at Zara. What kind of changes? Zara's skin patterns showed uncertainty as she translated his question. And then Elder Liana's response. She says the ritual would connect you to our world and our people in ways that would let you sense our emotions and understand our needs. But she also says it cannot be undone, and no one knows exactly how it would affect a human.
What's the
second option? David asked. You can remain in isolation until the current joining time passes. We would care for you and keep you safe, but you would not be allowed to interact with our community until our people are no longer affected by your presence. David understood what that meant. The Villani females were still dealing with their biological cycle, and his presence, as the only male they had seen in generations, was making it harder for them to cope. The third option, David asked, though he suspected he already knew. You can attempt to repair your ship and leave Lumina, Elder Liana said through Zara. We would help you as much as we can, but if you choose this path, you would need to go soon before your presence causes more disruption to our people. David felt like the world was spinning around him. Each option seemed impossible in its own way. The ritual sounded dangerous and irreversible. Isolation would mean giving up the relationships he had built, especially with Zara, and leaving. Leaving would mean abandoning people who needed help and walking away from the first place. He had ever felt like he might truly belong. How long? Do I have to decide? David asked. 3 days, Elder Liana replied. We're sorry to rush you, but yesterday's incident has created urgency. Some of our people are becoming upset, and we need to restore harmony to our community. After the council members left, David and Zara sat together in silence for a long time. Finally, Zara spoke. What are you thinking? She asked. David looked at her, this amazing being who had saved his life and become so important to him. I'm thinking that I never wanted to cause problems for you and your people. I'm also thinking that I don't know what I want anymore. Zara's skin patterns showed sadness mixed with something else. Hope, maybe, or determination. David, I need to tell you something that I haven't said before. David turned to face her fully. What is it? My feelings for you. They're not just because of the joining time. I've been worried that maybe they were, but I've thought about it carefully, and I know the difference. I care about you because of who you are, not because of what my biology tells me to feel. David's heart skipped a beat. He had been wondering the same thing about his own feelings. Zara, I care about you too, more than I expected. But I don't know if that's enough to make such a huge decision. I know, Zara said softly. But I wanted you to know the truth before you decide. Whatever you choose, I will understand. As David looked into Zara's star-like eyes, he realized that his decision wouldn't just affect his own future, it would impact Zara, the Villani community, and possibly the entire future of their civilization. 3 days suddenly seemed like no time at all. David spent 2 sleepless nights thinking about his choice. On the morning of the 3rd day, he found Zara sitting by the stream that flowed through her garden. Her skin patterns were dim, showing the sadness she was trying to hide. I've made my decision, David said, sitting down beside her. Zara looked up at him with those star-filled eyes. What have you chosen? I want to try the ritual, David said. I want to understand your people better. I want to be able to help instead of accidentally causing problems. Zara's skin immediately brightened with patterns David had learned meant joy mixed with worry. Are you sure? Elder Liana said it cannot be undone. No one knows what it might do to a human. David had thought about this all night. Zara, I've been thinking about my life before I crashed here. I was lonely on Earth. I spent months alone in space, going from planet to planet, mapping empty worlds. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. Here, with you and your people, I feel like I could have a real home. I want to try to make it work. That afternoon, David stood in the center of the same garden where he had disrupted the ceremony just days before. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Elder Liana and the other council members had spent hours preparing for the ritual, and curious Villani had gathered to watch. The ritual itself was unlike anything David could have imagined. Elder Liana had him sit beneath the largest, ancient tree while she and 4 other elders placed their hands on special crystalline formations that grew from the tree's roots. These crystals began to glow with a warm, pulsing light that seemed to match David's heartbeat. The connection process will help you understand how we experience emotions and relationships, Elder Liana explained through Zara. It may be uncomfortable at first, but try to remain calm. When the crystals reached their brightest glow, David felt something incredible happen. It was like someone had turned on a radio in his mind that was tuned to the emotions of everyone around him. He could suddenly sense how Zara was feeling, her love for him mixed with fear for his safety. He could feel Elder Liana's ancient wisdom and deep concern for her people. He could even sense the curiosity and hope of the Villani watching from a distance. But the experience was overwhelming. Human minds weren't designed to process so many emotions at once. David felt like he was drowning in feelings that weren't his own. His head pounded, and he had to fight not to cry out from the intensity of it all. David, Zara's voice seemed to come from far away, even though she was kneeling right beside him. Stay with us. Gradually, David learned to filter the emotional input. It was like learning to focus on one conversation in a crowded room. The overwhelming flood of feelings became manageable. David began to understand what was happening to him. He could now sense that the Villani weren't just experiencing attraction during their joining time. They were feeling deep loneliness and fear for the future of their species. Their need for connection went far beyond physical attraction. They were craving emotional bonds that could give them hope for survival. When the ritual ended, David felt different. Not just mentally, but physically too. His senses were sharper, and he could see patterns of light and energy around living. Things that he had never noticed before. More importantly, he could now understand exactly how his presence affected the Villani around him. How do you feel? Zara asked, her concern obvious both in her voice and in the emotions David could now sense from her.
Different,
David said honestly. but in a good way, I think. I can feel how much you care about me, Zara. I can feel how much all of you want your people to survive and thrive. Over the following weeks, David's new abilities proved to be both a blessing and a challenge. He could now help Villani, who were struggling with the emotional intensity of their joining time. When someone felt overwhelmed by loneliness or fear, David could sense it and offer comfort or guidance. But his enhanced empathy also meant he felt their pain more deeply than ever. One evening, he found a young Villani named Kira crying by the city's central fountain. Through his new abilities, David could sense that she was terrified about the future, afraid that their species would die out, and that all their beautiful culture would be lost forever. David sat with Kira and tried to comfort her, but his presence seemed to make her more upset, not less. She spoke rapidly to him in Villani, and even though David's language skills had improved, he couldn't follow everything she was saying. Later, Zara explained what had happened. Kira belongs to a group that believes your presence here is disrupting our natural order. They think that instead of helping us, you're making our situation more complicated and confusing. This worried David more than he wanted to admit. What do they want me to do? Some of them want you to leave Lumina, Zara said sadly. Others think you should stay but keep completely separate from our community. They believe that the old ways are the best ways and that we shouldn't change our traditions for anyone. David's enhanced empathy let him sense the conflict that Zara was feeling. She was torn between her loyalty to her people's traditions and her growing love for him. This inner struggle was causing her real pain, and knowing that he was the cause of it made David feel terrible. Things came to a head when David was working on his old communication equipment one evening. The ritual had somehow enhanced his technical abilities too, and he was making progress on repairs that had seemed impossible before. Suddenly, the device crackled to life. Through the static, David heard the most wonderful and terrible sound imaginable, a human voice calling from space. This is Earth's rescue ship Phoenix calling any survivors in this sector. Explorer David Shen, if you can hear this transmission, please respond. We have been searching for you for 4 months. Please respond. David's hand shook as he reached for the transmitter. Captain Rodriguez, his old friend and former commander, was out there looking for him. Earth hadn't forgotten about him. He could go home. But as David looked around at Zara's dwelling, at the beautiful Villani city visible through the window, and at Zara herself sitting nearby, he realized that the meaning of home had changed for him. Zara had sensed his emotional turmoil through their connection. David, what's wrong? People have found me, David said quietly. There's a rescue ship out there. I could leave Lumina and go back to Earth. Zara's skin patterns went completely dim for a moment, and David felt a wave of sadness and fear from her that almost knocked him over. But then her patterns returned, showing brave acceptance. That's wonderful news, she said, though David could sense that she didn't really mean it. You must be so happy to know you can see your home again. David looked at the radio, then at Zara, then back at the radio. I don't know what to do, he admitted. A few months ago, this would have been the best news I could imagine. But now you have connections here, Zara finished. You have people who care about you and people you care about. David nodded. Through his enhanced empathy, he could sense Villani throughout the city who had formed emotional bonds with him. Leaving wouldn't just affect him and Zara, it would hurt many people who had come to see him as part of their community. But staying meant giving up his entire previous life. It meant never seeing Earth again, never seeing his family or friends, never returning to the world where he was born. As David stared at the radio, he realized that his choice had become even more complicated than he had thought possible. The rescue ship wouldn't wait forever, and he would have to decide soon whether to call for help or let them pass by. Zara, David said finally, whatever I decide, I need you to know that these months with you and your people have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what it means to truly belong somewhere. Zara's emotional response to his words was so strong that David felt tears come to his own eyes. Whatever he chose, he knew that this decision would change everything, not just for him, but for everyone he had come to love on this distant world. David had been staring at the radio for 3 hours, trying to decide whether to respond to the rescue ship. The Phoenix was getting closer to Lumina every minute, and soon it would be too late to make contact. Finally, he made his choice. Earth. Rescue Ship Phoenix. This is David Chen responding, he said into the transmitter. I'm alive and well on the planet's surface. Please land at the coordinates I'm sending you. When the Phoenix landed in a clearing near the Villani city, 2 days later, David felt like he was watching two completely different worlds collide. The sleek metal ship looked so alien against the organic beauty of luminous glowing forests. Captain Rodriguez was the first person to step off the ship, and David barely recognized her. Her hair was longer than he remembered, and she looked tired from months of searching. When she saw David, her face lit up with relief and joy. David. Goodness, you're alive, she said, running toward him. But then she stopped suddenly, staring at him with surprise. You look ... different. David knew what she meant. The ritual had changed him in subtle but noticeable ways. His eyes reflected light differently now, and sometimes patterns of soft luminescence moved under his skin like the Villani. He looked healthier and more at peace than Captain Rodriguez had ever seen him. A lot has happened since I crashed here, Captain, David said. There are some amazing people I want you to meet. Zara approached them cautiously, her skin patterns showing nervousness about meeting other humans. David introduced them, and Captain Rodriguez's expression changed from curiosity to amazement as she realized she was meeting an intelligent alien. This is incredible, David, Captain Rodriguez whispered. First contact with an alien civilization? Do you realize how important this is? Over the next several days, Captain Rodriguez and her small crew learned about the Villani culture. David served as translator and guide, helping both species understand each other. Captain Rodriguez was fascinated by Villani technology and their harmony with nature, while the Villani were curious about Earth and human civilization. But David could sense tension building in the Villani community. Many of them were worried that more humans would come and change their world forever. The group led by Kira became more vocal about their concerns, arguing that contact with Earth would only bring trouble. The crisis came when Kira and her followers tried to sabotage the Phoenix to prevent it from leaving and reporting back to Earth. They didn't want to hurt anyone, but they were terrified of what might happen if Earth learned about. Lumina. David sensed the attack before it happened and was able to warn Captain Rodriguez in time. No one was hurt, but the incident forced both humans and Villani to confront the real challenges of first contact between their species. That night, Elder Liana called a meeting of the entire Villani Council, with David and Captain Rodriguez invited to participate. The discussion was intense, with different groups arguing about what should happen next. Some of our people fear that contact with Earth will destroy our way of life, Elder Liana explained through David's translation. Others believe that isolation will lead to our extinction. We need to find a path that protects our culture while giving us hope for the future. Captain Rodriguez listened carefully to all the concerns. Finally, she spoke. What if we could arrange a limited, carefully controlled contact between our worlds? Not a full-scale colonization or invasion, but a small exchange program where a few people from each species could learn from each other. David felt excitement ripple through the Villani Council as he translated this idea. This could be the solution they had all been hoping for. David could be our ambassador to Earth, Zara suggested. He understands both cultures now. He could help make sure that any contact between our peoples is respectful and beneficial. But Captain Rodriguez looked confused. David, you're coming back to Earth with us, aren't you? You can't seriously be thinking of staying here permanently. David felt the eyes of everyone in the room on him. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating for days. Captain, I've found something here that I never had on Earth, David said slowly. I've found a place where I belong, people who need me, and someone I love. I want to stay on. Lumina, but I also want to help build a bridge between our worlds. Captain Rodriguez looked shocked. David, think about what you're saying. This is your whole life you're talking about giving up. No, David said firmly. This is me choosing the life I really want instead of the life I was just drifting through. Zara's skin patterns showed overwhelming joy mixed with amazement. Through their emotional connection, David felt her happiness like warm sunlight. Elderly Anna spoke up. "If David stays as our ambassador, we would be willing to send one of our people back with your ship to learn about Earth and establish formal relations between our civilizations." And so it was decided. Captain Rodriguez would return to Earth with detailed records of Villani civilization and a young Villani volunteer named Tana, who was eager to explore the stars. David would remain on Lumina as the official human ambassador, but the most important decision was still to come. 3 days before the Phoenix was scheduled to leave, Zara asked David to walk with her to a special place in the forest where the oldest trees grew. These ancient giants were thousands of years old, and their light was so bright that the forest floor looked like it was covered in starlight. "David," Zara said, her skin patterns showing nervousness mixed with hope in our culture. "When two people want to bond permanently, they do so under these ancient trees. The trees witness their promise and help their emotional connection become even stronger." David understood what she was asking. "You want us to get married? Or whatever the Villani equivalent is?" "I want us to be partners for life," Zara said simply. "I want to build a future together, to work together to help our peoples understand each other and to be together through whatever challenges come." David looked up at the massive trees with their ancient wisdom and their beautiful light. Then he looked at Zara, this amazing being who had saved his life and shown him what love could really mean. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I want that too." The bonding ceremony took place the night before the Phoenix departed. Captain Rodriguez served as David's witness while elderly Anna performed the Villani rituals. The ceremony combined traditions from both cultures, creating something new and beautiful. As David and Zara stood together under the ancient trees, making promises to each other in both English and Villani, David felt more complete than he ever had in his life. 6 months later, David received his first communication from Earth. Captain Rodriguez had successfully established diplomatic relations between Earth and Lumina. A small embassy was being planned, and the first official Earth delegation would arrive within a year. Tana's reports from Earth were fascinating. She was learning about human technology and culture while teaching Earth scientists about Villani, bioengineering, and environmental harmony. The exchange was proving beneficial for both worlds. David's own work as ambassador kept him busy. He helped resolve misunderstandings between visiting Earth scientists and Villani communities. He worked with Elder Liana to establish protocols for future cultural exchanges. Most importantly, he helped individual Villani who were curious about Earth and individual humans who wanted to learn about Lumina. But the best part of David's new life was simply being with Zara. They had built a home together in a grove of young trees that they were helping to grow into living architecture. Their emotional connection had deepened over time, and David had learned to help Zara and other Villani navigate their joining times with wisdom and patience. One evening, as David and Zara sat together watching luminous 2 moons rise over their glowing forest, Zara asked him a question. "Do you ever regret your choice to stay here?" David thought about his old life on Earth, the loneliness, the endless missions to empty planets, the feeling that he was just going through the motions of living without really experiencing life. "No," he said, taking Zara's luminescent hand. "In his, crashing on this planet was the best thing that ever happened to me. I found a home, a purpose, and a love I never knew was possible." Zara's skin patterns showed pure happiness. "I'm glad the universe brought you to us. David, you've helped our people find hope for the future. And you've shown us that different species can not only coexist, but truly love each other." As they sat together under the stars of an alien sky, David realized that sometimes the best journeys are the ones that start with everything going wrong. His ship had crashed, his plans had been ruined, and his entire life had been turned upside down, and he had never been happier. In the distance, David could see the lights of the Villani city where both species now worked together, learning from each other and building a future that neither could have imagined alone. It was a future full of possibilities, challenges, and hope. It was exactly the kind of future David wanted to be part of.